watching Property TV.
Hello, welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and this is the programme where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of experts. And joining me today for the first time is Nicholas Zorpides, who's founder of Nicholas & Co. Surveyors. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
We'll try and be gentle with you the first time, or
Please do.
we'll try anyway. And joining you is Kam Dovedi, founder of Premier Property Group, investor, developer, author and mentor. Welcome, Deb.
Good to see you, Stephen.
Good to have you on the show again. Right, well, we'll get straight on with the questioning. And Nicholas, you're going first.
Mm-hmm.
I'm considering buying my first property with a maximum mortgage. I understand that besides the standard lender valuation, there are various grades of home surveys available. Would the panel recommend I have such a report? And would it help my valuation figure if the report was good?
Right, so let's tackle it in two parts. Yes, definitely recommend getting a home buyer's survey. Probably best to explain the roles and responsibilities of a surveyor and a valuer in these instances. So appointing a surveyor to carry out a home buyer's, the duty of care is to the homeowner. So he's there to assist and advise homeowners to any defects that could arise in the properties or costs going forward.
Okay.
A valuer, on the other hand, is acting on behalf of the bank, and his duty of care is to the bank in order to determine value.
And purely value.
Purely value, albeit they do review the condition of the property, which affects value. But there was a case, Scullion versus Bank of Scotland in 2010, that relayed that information to say that the valuer's duty is to the bank and not the borrower. Hence why you would get your own independent survey as to the condition of the property, which will assist you in making your judgment from there. As to whether it would help if you have the good home buyers, not necessarily, I would say. And that's mainly because the valuer, acting on behalf of the bank, is acting independently of such surveys.
And he's not going to know really whether you've got a home buyer's report
no,
or not.
And if he did, he wouldn't or shouldn't necessarily review that. He has to come to his own judgment on the condition and the value of the property.
Yeah.
So no, in that sense, yes, do get a home buyers, but as when it comes to the valuation, they're acting independently from that.
Well, you're talking to somebody who's spent a lifetime arguing with valuers about the values of property, dealing on sort of new developments. But would you recommend a home buyer's report if, for instance, the buyer was buying a new property?
I would still recommend to do so in these instances. There are individuals that will do. It is still a condition survey, so actually yes, you wouldn't do it to a high level, to a level 3 for example, because that also includes costings for defects. But you could still definitely do one to review the property in itself. So yes, it's still a condition survey. There are people that do snagging surveys instead of a home buyers when it comes to a new build.
Yes, that might be useful.
So that is also useful. So they could prefer to do that instead, and actually that helps because you can go back to the developer and say, these are a few of the issues outstanding.
Okay. And
they tend to come and fix those. So either a snagging survey if it's a new build, but you could still definitely do a home buyer.
How are the fees for a home buyer's report calculated? Is it on a percentage of the value or is it a set fee?
The surveyors will do it as to whatever their company relies, but you would tend to do it on, you could do it on value, you could do it on the size, because that would determine how long it would take you to be on site for. So a 2-bedroom flat, for example, you can't compare to a 5-bedroom house. No, don't forget it's an internal and an external survey, so you could be on site for 2 to 3 hours, reviewing all the services. So it is determined on size and value, in all honesty.
It seems to me actually, although perhaps the first time buyers are sort of relatively inexperienced in the property market, it's just the sort of service that would actually serve them well.
Most definitely,
certainly give them confidence for the next time. What do you think, Kam?
I think home buyers reports are good for someone starting out. It's good to get a home buyer's report initially. The way I would suggest that someone uses that, or the way I've used it in the past, is it gives you a whole traffic light system of what are mandatory requirements in that property, what are discretionary, and things that you don't need to do to the property. Also, it gives you a nice map of a property, so you can actually outline the specifics, so you can really learn from the home buyer's report. That's how I would suggest to use it as a tool. It can also scare off people, because in a home buyer's report, all the items are listed, and actually they're fairly, usually in my experience, very manageable. However, the long list can scare people of saying, oh, there's so much to do, but actually when you tick it off, it's not actually that much as such. So, be aware of that. Moving forward, if, from the investor's angle, whether you're new or whether you're experienced, you're paying anywhere between £350 to £700. And of course, it's good to pay for a good service. However, being truthful with you, I think once you had one or two, let's say, and you kind of cut your teeth on those, you really don't need that moving forward. So our mode of operation is we have a structure in place. So we'll view the property ourselves. We learn from the home buyer's report and so on. You have a little good look around, and everyone can do that. From an initial level. What we then do is we ask a contractor to come around, and this is on the shortlisted properties. So you might view, let's say, 10. Out of those 10, you're already scrutinised. 8 of them are not for you, and you're looking at the 1 or 2 that are for you. We then bring in contractors. We get the contractor to have a good look around. And typically, one of my contractors, for example, Gary, if Gary turns around and says, Kam, you should have a little look at that corner up there, then we understand that we now get a survey done. So that is code for get a structural survey, a little bit more in depth into that, have a look at that. If he says, oh yeah, it's just the regular stuff that you buy and it needs a tidy up and needs a light refurb, then we're quite confident with that. And then what we do is we take it to the lenders. Now, although in the small print it says that lenders, it's not actually a full valuation. Let's be honest, they're not going to lend you money if there's a major problem with that property, in my experience anyway. So that actually adds as another vetting process after the contractor, and that's how we do it. If someone's starting out and they're a little bit nervous about that, then by all means get those, like I say at the beginning, get those 1 or 2 home buyers reports, cut your teeth on them, and you'll find that you'll save yourself a lot of money.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you for that, Kam. Kam, on with your question now. I have a single HMO which I've been operating for 2 years now. Do the panel think that converting this premises to serviced accommodation would be a good idea? If the panel has any advice or tips on this subject, I'd be most grateful. Well,
first of all, congratulations for running a HMO for over 2 years. That's in itself a brilliant aspect that someone's actually done that, the listener's done that. In terms of HMOs and service accommodation, what we find is the margin that is actually created actually ends up being the same. So typically we find that the margin is around 30% more than you would achieve from a buy-to-let. And both models work. It really is about having the right area for that model for it to work. So service accommodation will work in certain areas such as high street locations, central areas of town, for example. HMOs that we have, they tend to be student properties, they tend to be key worker properties. So it's a different location is my point. But both models, strangely, actually achieve the same result in terms of the income and cash flow. So it's a case of choosing.
Yeah. So it's a question, I suppose, looking at the investment that you've got to make any particular changes and apply it to the area that you're operating in, I suppose.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, okay. And would there be any regulatory differences in between serviced accommodation and HMOs?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, for sure. So HMOs, lenders are much more acceptable with the HMO scenarios. So whether they are, we call them under the radar. So that's 4 tenants or less.
Right.
So you might have heard the phrase minimos, for example,
Right.
Or there can be more than 4 tenants. Both of those are mortgageable. You can get finance for those, and what we find is that there's a lot of lenders available for that type of product, for that type of stock. When it comes to service accommodation, of course, you want to do this legally, you want to do it correctly, and you want to do it as a good business. Now, lenders, they're limited in the market when it comes to service accommodation. So it's a case of balancing that and finding out which is the right approach for you.
Okay. But just on that point of regulation, so you need a specific license along with planning consent, don't you, for an HMO?
You do sometimes.
Okay. And is that the same?
Not all the case. Yeah.
Right. Is that the same for serviced accommodation?
So different for service accommodation. So let's discuss HMOs first then. So there is a myth out there that you need licensing for every type of HMO. It's not the case. Some of our listeners will be aware of this. For some, this is new. So HMOs licensing is not always necessary. Specifically for tenants and below, many councils will decide how they want to work with that. But you will find councils where no license is required, and you can literally run the HMO correctly, of course. You've got to adhere to legislation. For example, mandatory room sizes, 6.52 square meters, and so on, other things like that. So HMOs, different types of legislation, not always required planning. Sui generis, yes, you do, but not always. With the service accommodation scenario, again, it's kind of a very grey area in the real world. And of course, I'm sharing with you what's happening in the real world. So it is a bit of a grey area. If you're in blocks with management companies who own the block and they've got a management company there, always important to read their management company agreement. Are they allowing service accommodation? Are they not allowing it? Lenders also, some of them will allow that, some won't allow that. So you've got to look at the lending side of things as well. And in terms of planning, you can go for planning in some areas, but like what I say, in some areas you don't really need it. In fact, if we're having an honest conversation, which we are, some of the councils, I'm going to put my neck on the line and say, they are not really aware what to do with that situation themselves.
Okay.
In some of the councils.
Okay.
Which is quite interesting.
All right, well, that's a very comprehensive answer. Thank you very much for that, Kam. Just quickly, anything to comment on that, Nicholas?
No, I think that was a good answer.
Okay.
It's not necessarily my field of expertise. I would say from people that I do know that have moved over into the SA kind of market, it is ever so much more running, sounds like anyway, of running a business rather than owning an investment.
Yeah. Okay,
so just be aware of that.
Thank you for that, gentlemen. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show, so join me again after the break.
You are watching Property TV. You are watching Property TV.
Hello, and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm joined by Nicholas Zorpides and Kam Dovedi, so we'll get on with the questions for part 2. Nicholas, do the experts think that the increase in inflation levels to around 7.5% predicted by the Bank of England will spread through to the cost of housing, both in terms of purchase and rental? Have you got your crystal ball?
It's very difficult to predict on a hypothetical, but inflation will have an effect on interest rates. The Bank of England or any central bank will tend to raise interest rates to tackle inflation. So should that occur, you will see, it's difficult to predict, but if you look at other markets, so if you compare it to the US market, for example, you would see that the rise of inflation, the rise of the interest rates has had a negative effect on values. So values actually stabilized and in some regions even went down. So looking at that model, you can easily make the assumption to say that if that should happen, then the house market in the UK will start to decline. As anything, it's a supply and demand, so it will weigh on the demand of the property market in the UK should the inflation does increase and therefore the mortgage rates increase.
Well, I think you're probably right. I mean, I think from talking to a lot of people in the market at the moment, they're saying that the market's still fairly strong, but it's slowing down, isn't it?
Yeah.
The prices are remaining okay at the moment, but it is certainly slowing down. And of course, rate of sales will eventually have an effect on price, won't it? It's just,
yeah, of course.
It's as simple as that.
The RICS has come out with a prediction of their own to say that property prices are increasing and due to carry on increasing. So in the short term to medium, I would say that you wouldn't see too much an effect on the property market. But at the point of the rise in interest rates and mortgage rates and cost of borrowing, which really is what affects the market the most, you would see that level go down.
But I suppose it's a little bit like the sort of production figures. You've got to go back 2 years to see how much it dropped, and compare that with the increase that we're seeing now. I mean, the government are very quick to say, "Oh, we're up 9% or whatever." They don't tell you that it went down 12. You know, I mean, that's the sort of rough comparison, isn't it? What do you think, Kam?
Well, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand that inflation actually isn't 5.4% or the predicted 7%. You've only got to fill up your petrol or your diesel. You've only got to go and buy your regular groceries. You know, you look at the energy bills, right? Yeah, enough said on that. We all know that in reality, inflation is much higher than that, which is a problem and it is a challenge for regular people that have money in the bank. They're seeing inflation eroding that money in real terms. But as a property investor, where you're momentum investing and you're treating property as a business, it actually becomes a big advantage to you when you really think about it. So specifically, thinking about money in the bank, think about the money that you're actually borrowing in terms of lending. So typically, we'll borrow up to 75% loan to value. That 75% comes from a lender. That money that is borrowed, if you think about it in real terms, inflation is actually eroding that debt. And also at the same time, these assets that you're buying, you're making them produce income, which is coming in while, yes, you control your business, but you have to do very minimal once you set it up correctly to then get the income coming in. So are we then saying that inflation is first of all eroding the loan itself, so that in real terms, the loan is going down over time? And on top of that, you've got an asset that's literally giving you money coming in on a monthly basis because you've done it correctly.
It's growing at the inflationary rate.
So and which is there's that. That's my view on inflation. And prices, yes, they are going up. One thing in my experience so far, what I've noticed is two things never stay in status quo, and that is increasing inflation and interest rates. So as inflation increases, as we're noticing, interest rates always follow. So I strongly believe that there is a short window of opportunity to really optimize on what anybody wants to do in property investing.
Yeah. Just on another factor, a question for both of you, really. I mean, I'm reading in the newspapers and the property press this week that people are saying that young people are now flocking back into the city areas. There was an exodus, now they're coming back. Essentially, I suppose, for the economy of the city centres, really, the coffee bars, the snack bars, all the rest of it. Is that going to have an effect on prices, do you think? What do you think?
Difficult to say, but like anything, it's supply and demand. So if there is a surge in that demand for specific units, so these would be apartment styles for the city centre, you could see a slight increase in values there. But as I said, as the cost of living starts going up with inflation and the interest rates, I think it will slowly stabilise and not fall off slightly.
I mean, people who regularly watch this programme will have heard me say this before, but I've always been a bit suspicious of these sort of exodus stories, to the countryside, where, you see a country estate agent interviewed on the TV and it says, oh, yeah, business is up, 50%. Yeah, but from what to what? I mean, here in London, a good agent might be selling 20 properties a week. In the country, they might be selling 2.
Yeah.
So if they sell 3,
you can't really compare and contrast, can you? No.
It's a bit of a false figure, isn't it? What do you think?
So what we're finding is it's about finding the right areas to invest in, and you're quite right. The country is coming back to normality after the pandemic and so on. However, when it comes to investing, it comes back to treating it like a business. So investing in an area where it's the center of town isn't always the best place to invest in terms of a business. So what we're finding is that there is outward migration into areas and towns where there wasn't before. And the pandemic, if it's done anything, what it's done is it's given people a new way of working, a new way of thinking. So people are working in offices and they also are working from home. And people are also realizing that, actually they can commute and they are looking for areas where they're getting more for their money. So there is that inward migration into these new areas, the outskirts, let's call it, of major towns. We call them satellite towns. So that is happening, and they are really good, excellent areas to be investing in, because if you're thinking of it like a business, you're going to find that the rentals are actually increasing. We're finding in our gold mine areas, as they're called, these specific areas, rentals have actually gone up by over 10% in some of these areas. And there's demand, a high demand for tenancies. Conversely, in some towns, places in London, rentals have actually gone down, and there isn't such a demand. So it's about finding that right area and doing the right thing with your investment.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I also think the in the home counties in and around London, as you were saying, because people can work from home, can commute within an hour, they'll be in London. That those markets have definitely seen an increase as well. So yeah, it depends as to that exactly. But
I never think that trends based on commuting seem to last very long. You know, I used to commute into London from Henley, which is lovely, until you're standing there at 6 o'clock in the morning and they say, "Very sorry, but this train isn't working today," and you know you're in for £100 taxi ride if you want to get to work. But anyway, there we are.
But now you can work from home, you see.
Yeah, well,
so
hopefully. Okay, Kam, your second question. I run quite a large HMO and have been made aware of the current heating cost cap will not apply to my property as it's heated by a communal system. In the first instance, is this correct? And secondly, do the experts have any advice on controlling heating costs in this type of environment?
Very interesting question. So I'd be curious to understand who's actually paying for that communal heating. Someone must be paying for it. And usually somehow it comes back around to you normally. So I'd have a look at that. How we're mitigating the costs that are going up, and they are spiraling up. I mean, we all know this, don't we, right? You only got to look at your most recent electricity bill or gas bill. It's shocking what's going on out there. They've already doubled, haven't they? And we're looking at them quadrupling is where we're seeing that going. So what do? Well, what we've got to remember is we are in the business of people. We're providing accommodation for people. I always keep that in mind with the HMOs. So it's not about, turning off the heating or cutting down, saying you can only use so much and so on.
Or buying them a jumper for Christmas.
Or buying them a jumper for Christmas.
my granddad used to do, put on more clothes.
But it's none of that. So our view is that you want them to enjoy the accommodation while you can reduce the cost. So how do you actually do that? So a couple of quick solutions amongst many. One of them is actually using sensor lights. Sensor lighting where no one has to actually physically turn on and off a light switch. So that's not preventing anybody from using that service, but they can use it and the sensors help. As needed, turn on and off as required. So that's a really simple, a very effective way of reducing your electricity in a HMO. Another thing is putting in these smart thermostats. So for our gas boilers and so on, we have these smart thermostats, which again, don't limit anybody from using the heating. They can use it as much as they like. All they have to do is, after a certain period, typically 60 minutes and 90 minutes, they just literally have to press a button to actually restart it up. So, which prevents people from abusing it. So if someone's in the accommodation, they need the heating to be kept on, they literally have to, actually do something to carry on for the heating to carry on, which saves, again, a lot of money. So, there's a lot of simple things, a number of simple things that you can put in place. There's a couple.
Okay, great. Well, that's very good advice, and thank you both very much for your input today. So, big thank you to Nicholas Zorpides. I hope it's not been too stressful for you on your first appearance. And Kam Dovedi, as ever, thank you very much for your contribution. Always good, useful advice. Thank you. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.